Welcome to Chapter 1 of Abnormal Psychology. In this chapter, we're going to just do a brief overview of the study of abnormal psychology and some of the concepts and terms that you'll need to be familiar with throughout the course. First, what do we mean by abnormality? It's important to realize that there's no consensus definition of abnormality. However, there are some clear elements that will signal that there may be some abnormal behavior. The elements of abnormality include suffering, maladaptiveness, deviancy, violation of the standards of society, social discomfort, irrationality and unpredictability, and dangerousness of the behavior. Now, some things to remember. No one element is sufficient to define or determine abnormality. We can't choose just one thing and go ahead and determine that that person is exhibiting abnormal behavior. And second, the definition of deviant changes as society changes. Some examples that we look at would be multiple piercings or multiple tattoos that at one time may have been a sign of some deviant behavior, but now is accepted. The DSM-5 definition. DSM stands for Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, and 5 refers to the edition of this manual that we are currently using. The DSM, Diagnostical Statistical Manual, is used to define behavior and classify different forms of abnormal behavior. For a definition of mental disorder, according to the DSM, we're looking for a clinically significant disturbance in behavior, emotional regulation, or cognitive function associated with distress or disability and leading to a biological, psychological, or developmental dysfunction in an individual. Why do we need to classify mental disorders? This is a very hotly debated topic at times. Some advantages of a classification system is that they give us a way to structure and organize the information. They also help us have a consistency in diagnosing a person with a disorder. But the classification systems have social and political implications. This can do with funding, treatment, different things. And it's important to remember that we classify disorders, not people. So therefore, we would refer to someone as having schizophrenia, not being a schizophrenic. What are the disadvantages of classification? Some of the disadvantages include a loss of individuals' information. An example of this would be if I had a client who came in and maybe brought a chart from another therapist and I saw the diagnosis, or if they told me they had been diagnosed at one time with a certain disorder, I might form opinions about them and not dig as deeply and get their individual information as I would if I started with a blank slate. Also, there's some stigma and stereotyping that takes place and is associated with certain diagnoses. And also, being given a diagnosis could impact some people's self-concept or self-esteem. How does culture affect what is considered abnormal? There are many cultural factors that influence a diagnosis or what's considered abnormal behavior. The presentation of disorders is found worldwide, but some of it is very culturally specific. Some things that are accepted in one culture would be considered very abnormal or inappropriate in another. How common are mental disorders, and why do we care? This is a significant question for many reasons. First, it directly affects the planning, establishing, and funding of mental health services for specific disorders. And then also by keeping up and tracking mental disorders, we can get some clues to the causes. If we're seeing a certain disorder clustered in a certain geographical location, among a certain age group, a certain gender, or certain population, then we have some clues and we know where to look and do our research. These are some terms that I want you to be familiar with, and you will see them on an exam. First is epidemiology, and this refers to the study of the distribution of diseases, disorders, or health-related behaviors in a given population. When we talk about epidemiology, we break it down a little bit further into prevalence and incidence. Prevalence talks about the number of active cases in a population during any given period of time. Prevalence is typically expressed as a percentage, and there are several different types of prevalence estimates that we look at. When we talk about incidence, we're talking about the number of new cases in a population over a given period of time. Therefore, our incident figures are typically lower than our prevalence figures. As I mentioned, when we look at our prevalence estimates for mental disorders, we break them down into several different ways. We can look at the lifetime prevalence of a disorder, we can look at a yearly prevalence of a disorder, or we can look at what we call point prevalence of a disorder, and that would be looking at the number of cases at a certain point in time. We can also break it down into the most prevalent category of disorders, the most common individual disorders, and then we look at comorbidity. And comorbidity refers to having more than one diagnosis at the same time. And you'll see as we go through that there are several different diagnoses that we often see going hand in hand. For example, generalized anxiety with depression. What about treatment? Not all people receive treatment, and there's several reasons for that. One could be financial, one could be a cultural thing that we don't talk about our problems with other people. It can be how you were raised, that's just, a hoax, and you don't go and talk to somebody, there's nothing they can really do. Whatever the beliefs are. People who do seek treatment, it's usually done on an outpatient basis, and again, this may be due to financial reasons. It's hard to take off time for inpatient treatment. Insurance may limit the type of treatment that a person can receive. If someone does have inpatient hospitalization, it's typically in a psychiatric unit of a general hospital or possibly a private hospital. There's several different research approaches in abnormal psychology, and it's important to have this scientific attitude to the approach to the study of abnormal behavior. It gives us a greater understanding of the nature of the disorder, and by using the scientific method and scientific research, there's a reduction in error. One way that we can gather information is through case studies. In a case study, a specific individual is observed and described in detail. Now, the problem with this is that it can be subject to bias of the author of the case study, because many times the author is trying to prove a hypothesis or come to a certain conclusion. Also, because it's very specific to the individual being observed, there can be a low generalizability to the information received. It may not apply to very many other people. Another way of gathering information is through self-reporting. In self-reporting, participants are asked to provide information about themselves. They may participate in a series of interviews and questionnaires, but they may have their own personal bias based on if they want to present as more well or more healthy than they actually are, or perhaps they want to present as more sick than they actually are. And because they are self-reporting, the data may. Another way to collect information is through the observational approach. In this approach, you collect information without asking participants directly for it. The outward behavior is observed directly by the clinician or the person that is conducting the research. For example, if I was watching a child that had been suspected of having ADD or attention deficit disorder, I may go to the school and observe them in the classroom or at PE or in the cafeteria to see this behavior. We can also observe biological variables via technology. This would be monitoring the heart rate, perhaps a CT scan, or using other technology to see what's going on biologically.